My name is Claire. I'm 28 years old. And last Christmas, I brought an envelope to dinner that shattered everything. I remember the sound of the wine being poured more than anything else. That slow, syrupy glug into crystal. It felt luxurious, almost obscene, like we were pretending to be something we weren't. My mother's house had always been carefully staged around the holidays, like a photo shoot for people we never quite were. Pine garland on the banister. Ornaments placed like strategy pieces. Not one thing out of order. Not one person, either. Except me. I stood at the doorway for a moment too long. Coat still on, holding that envelope inside my handbag like a quiet bomb. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care enough to ask why my hands were shaking. My stepfather was carving the ham like a man playing a role. My brother, Sam, her real child, as I used to call him silently, was swirling something expensive in his glass. He glanced up when I walked in, gave me the obligatory nod. His wife barely looked at me, too busy corralling their perfect blonde toddler into a sparkly red dress. Everything gleamed. "Claire," my mother said, her voice slicing the room like a butter knife. "You're late. I'm here," I replied. That's all I said. She smiled. That sharp, tight-lipped smile she always reserved for public politeness and private disappointment. I hung up my coat, slipped into the scene like an understudy. Every holiday was like this scripted, and I knew my part well, the black sheep, the afterthought, the one who made things difficult. I had spent years trying to please them, to blend into their narrative. Even when I was little, I traced my features in the mirror and tried to see her in me. Try to see him. Too, the man I was told had died in a car crash when I was 4. But there were no photos of him. No stories. No family heirlooms. Just a single silver-framed picture that sat on her dresser. Blurry, generic, forgettable. And even that was turned toward the wall more often than not. As a kid, I didn't question it. But over time, absence becomes a scream. When I was 12, I asked her about him again. Just once. It was a rare moment quiet. A school night. Just the two of us doing dishes. I remember the soap bubble sliding over her wedding ring. "Mum, what was Dad like?" She stopped scrubbing for maybe half a second, then resumed. "He loved you very much," she said flatly. "Let's not bring up sad things tonight." That was it. The wall slammed shut again. Years went by, and the silence around him grew heavier. Like there was a hole in the family photo that no one acknowledged. Last summer, something cracked. It started with an offhand comment from my aunt at a backyard barbecue. She was drunk vodka slurring her edges, but her words hit with surgical precision. "You never wondered why you don't look like any of us?" "Claire." I laughed it off, but inside, I froze. After that, I started watching people differently. Their glances when I walked in. The way conversations would curl away when I asked questions about the past. How even Sam would stutter if I mentioned anything before age 5. So, I did what you're not supposed to do in families like mine. I looked for answers. I took a DNA test, not out of anger, just out of need. That quiet ache that follows you everywhere like a shadow. I wanted to know. I needed something that wasn't curated or doctored or twisted to fit someone else's idea of what the truth should be. The results came back 2 weeks before Christmas, and they didn't just surprise me. They erased me. I wasn't my stepfather's daughter, I already knew that, but I wasn't my mother's either. Not biologically. The data didn't lie. Half my DNA came from a woman I'd never met, and the other half from a man I'd grown up calling a ghost, was still very much alive. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel betrayed. I just stared at that screen for an hour, then printed out the summary and placed it in a plain envelope. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, until Christmas morning. Something in me snapped awake that day, not vengeful, not cruel, just clear. So I got dressed, packed the envelope, and went to dinner. Late. On purpose. I wasn't going to start a fight. I just wanted to see them, to see who flinched first. The ham was glazed with honey and cloves, cut into precise slices just the way my stepfather liked it. My mother stood at the head of the table, folding her cloth napkin with too much tension. Her knuckles whitened. She always hosted like she was being judged by someone invisible. And maybe she was by her own mother, who died when I was 7 but still haunted this house in echoes and traditions. I slid into my usual seat, end of the table, not next to anyone in particular. Wine, Sam's wife offered, too cheerful. Sure, she poured it before I could finish answering. The child, Mia, started to cry. She didn't want to sit still for grace. Sam hushed her and gave his wife an exasperated look, like being a father was an inconvenience he hadn't agreed to. I watched the dynamic play out without comment. I didn't speak unless spoken to. That had always been the rule. My mother sat down last. Shall we pray? We all bowed our heads, hands awkwardly folded. The same meaningless words were mumbled. The same ritual we repeated every year, hollow and neat. When it was over, forks clinked on china, and fake conversation began. Work, updates, new shoes. Sam was expanding his portfolio, which meant he had a new rental property downtown. His wife talked about her blog. I chewed my food slowly, tasting nothing, waiting for the moment to rise. Claire, my mother said finally. What are you working on these days? Her tone was diplomatic, thinly veiled disapproval wrapped in civility. She always asked like she didn't really want to know. I'm freelancing, I said, quietly. Some writing, some research. Still, the word lingered. Still. Like I was stuck. Like I hadn't grown. Like everything I did was a stall between failures. Sam chuckled under his breath. Bet that's not paying much. I looked at him. It's not about the money. He smirked. Says the broke sibling? His wife laughed. It wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was casual. My mother didn't stop them. She didn't even blink. Something sharp pushed into my throat, but I didn't let it out. Instead, I reached into my bag. The envelope wasn't even creased, just a plain white thing. Clean. Simple. Like the kind you'd use for wedding invitations or death notices. I placed it on the table, between the mashed potatoes and the butter dish. What's that? My stepfather asked. My mother went still. I didn't answer immediately. I just stared at her, watched the way her jaw tightened, the way her hand hovered over her wine glass without touching it. It's something I've been working on, I said softly. Sam reached for it. I let him. He pulled the flap open with too much force, probably expecting some passive-aggressive joke, a late Christmas card. But as soon as he saw the top of the paper, the bold letters, the family match percentage, his face changed. He pushed it back like it burned. What the hell is this? He asked. I didn't look at him. I looked at her. My mother. Her expression was unreadable. A mask I'd seen too many times. Did you think I wouldn't find out I asked her? The room went silent. Mia dropped her spoon. The sound it made as it hit the floor was louder than anything. You're not making sense, she said, but her voice wavered. Just a little. Enough. I leaned forward. My voice was low, steady, but my hands trembled in my lap. I'm not your daughter. Not biologically. You never told me that. She didn't move. I took a DNA test. I continued. It matched me to someone named Lorraine Mendelsohn from Portland. I contacted her. She had a baby in 1995. Said it was taken at birth through a closed adoption. Said she always wondered. Sam whispered something I didn't hear. His wife was frozen. Even Mia had stopped moving. I was adopted, I said, and you never told me. My mother finally blinked. That's not true. Really, I said, lifting the page, because this says otherwise. She looked at my stepfather then, for the first time. Not at me, at him, and I saw it. That glance, that silent exchange, that terrible, undeniable confirmation. I felt hollow. You lied to me my entire life. I said, my voice didn't shake. You made me feel like I was a burden, a stranger in my own home. And you knew. You knew why I didn't fit, why I never felt right. Sam stood up. This is insane. Who cares where your DNA comes from? You were raised here. You're still Claire. I looked at him. You laughed at me when I was 12 and asked why I looked nothing like anyone. You said I was probably adopted as a joke. He went quiet. My stepfather finally spoke. We didn't tell you because we didn't think it mattered. But it did. I whispered. It mattered every day. My mother's face was pale. Her hands were trembling now, too. I stood up slowly. I'm not here for revenge, I said, just above a whisper. I'm just here so the truth can sit at the table for once. No one said a word. The envelope stayed on the table, open. The turkey grew cold. I picked up my coat and left without a sound. Outside, the snow had started falling, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I had just walked into my real life. I didn't cry on the drive home. Not even when the streetlights blurred into little comets through the windshield. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. But otherwise, I was calm. Too calm. It was like my body had been waiting years for that moment to finally stop pretending that the wound wasn't real. The silence in my apartment was gentler than the silence at that table. I peeled off my coat, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window, watching the snow fall. It was beautiful in the quietest way. Not dramatic, just steady. I could hear my breath again. My phone buzzed. I didn't check it. Buzzed again. Then stopped. I didn't need to read the messages. I could already imagine them. My mother would try the guilt card first. You embarrassed the family. Then the rationalization. We were trying to protect you. And then, finally, the worst one, silence. She'd go radio silent, not out of shame, but out of strategy. That was always her way to disappear until she could control the story again. But not this time. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out the folder. The DNA report was only part of it. I'd been quietly collecting things for a while now. Printed emails from the genealogy service, records I'd requested from the state, even Lorraine's handwritten letter. The first one she sent after we spoke. She hadn't known what to say, just that she had always felt something missing. And when my message came, she couldn't breathe for a full minute. She wanted to meet. I hadn't answered her yet. It felt too big, too raw. But I kept the letter, neatly folded, tucked between copies of hospital discharge records and a grainy scan of a birth certificate, with the name blacked out. I was born January 3rd, 1996, but not in this town, not in this state. The hospital listed was in Oregon. That detail struck me like a sudden wind every time I looked at it. Oregon. Not here. Not this life. Some other one I'd never been given the chance to live. The photo Lorraine sent came a few weeks after the letter. She looked like me. Not in an obvious way. Not like in the movies where long-lost relatives stare at each other and gasp. But in the subtleties. The way her mouth tilted downward when she wasn't smiling. The shape of her shoulders. Even the way she held her hands, curled inward, slightly protective. I stared at that photo now, holding it like something fragile. I'd asked for the truth, and I had it. But it didn't make things easier. If anything, it made them heavier. I was adrift, not anchored to any version of myself I could trust. And yet, I wasn't scared. There was something liberating in the unravelling. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. I finally checked. Mum, you don't understand everything. It's more complicated than you think. I stared at the words for a long time, and then I typed, then explain it. No reply. Of course not. I turned off the phone and slid it under the couch cushion, like it might contaminate the peace I was trying to rebuild. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just laid there in the dark, eyes open, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whisper of snow brushing the windows. I kept replaying Christmas dinner over and over, the look in my mother's eyes, not shock, not remorse, just the old, familiar calculation. The way she always paused before responding, as if she were editing her thoughts in real time. She never wanted the truth to come out, because the truth meant losing control. I thought about the childhood birthdays she never celebrated properly, always an afterthought, as if it pained her to acknowledge the day. I thought about the school projects she never helped with, the way she never once said, "I'm proud of you," even when I brought home straight A's or won writing contests. She kept me close like a secret she resented having. And now I knew why. She hadn't chosen me. She had covered me, like wallpaper over something cracked. The next morning, I made coffee and opened my laptop. I typed in Lorraine's email address and hovered over the keyboard for a while before starting. Hi, Lorraine. I'm ready to talk. I think, maybe not in person yet, but I'd like to hear more. About you. About what happened. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to reply. I've been grieving for a life that was never mine. But I want to know who I really am. Claire. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I stared at the screen, waiting for something. Not a reply, necessarily, just a sense that this path forward wasn't made entirely of glass. The snow had stopped by then. The streets below were blanketed in white, untouched, a clean slate, or at least the start of one. Lorraine replied the next evening. Her email was short, careful, as if she didn't want to overwhelm me. Claire, I can't tell you how much this means. I've waited 28 years for you to find me. I always hoped, but I didn't want to intrude on your life if you didn't want me. I want to tell you everything, about how it happened, about him. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. Love, Lorraine. I read it twice. Then I read it again. About him. The words hung there, suspended in quiet gravity. I hadn't asked about my father yet, not out loud. It was too much to name, too many variables to sort through. My entire sense of origin was already scrambled, and the idea of another unknown figure, one still living, felt almost cruel. But I needed to know. Of course I did. So I wrote her back. Lorraine, tell me everything, please. I don't care how ugly it is. I just need the truth. Claire. She called me the next morning. I didn't expect that. My phone buzzed, and for a moment, I just stared at the name on the screen. Lorraine Mendelsohn. Her voice was soft, gentler than I expected, and nervous. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. No one had called me that in a long time. I didn't want to write it all in an email. She said, "It felt wrong. It's not easy to explain." I sat down on the floor, back against the couch. "I'm listening." She took a breath, then began. "I got pregnant when I was 19. I was in love, or I thought I was. His name was Jonathan. Older than me, smart, intense, but private. Always private." My chest tightened. I didn't interrupt. He was already married. I didn't know at first. When I found out, I wanted to leave him. But by then, I was already pregnant. And when I told him, he panicked. She paused. His wife couldn't have children. That's what he told me. He said he'd handle it, that he had a friend in social services who could place the baby somewhere safe. I didn't realise what that meant until it was too late. I closed my eyes. "Claire," she said quietly, "I never signed any official adoption papers. They forged my signature. I woke up in the hospital after delivery, and you were gone. My whole body went cold. I tried to find you, but Jonathan disappeared. And so did you." I whispered. "His name's not Jonathan anymore. It's David now." There was silence on the line. "I think he's my stepfather." Lorraine gasped. "Oh, my God." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I grew up thinking he married my mum when I was 5, that my real dad had died in a car crash. But he was there long before that. He's the one who raised me. A breath shook through the receiver. "I don't know how deep it goes," I continued, "but I think they did this together. Took me. Lied to everyone. Lied to me." Lorraine started crying then, not loud, not dramatic, just the soft, grieving sound of someone mourning something for the second time. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Claire." And I believed her. I sat there on the floor, tears finally slipping down my face, because I finally understood. I wasn't abandoned. I was stolen. Everything made sense now. The tension, the distance, the shame that sat like fog in every room of my childhood. I had always felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, and now I knew why. I thanked Lorraine for telling me. She asked if she could send me more, old photos, scanned letters, memories she wrote down in case she ever found me. I said yes. After we hung up, I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, my back pressed against the couch, the phone still in my hand, like maybe it would ring again and undo the last 28 years. But it didn't, and the quiet that followed was something else now. Not peace, not exactly, more like clarity. I stood up and went to the bookshelf, pulled out the family photo albums, the ones my mother kept so pristine, arranged by year, captioned with perfect handwriting. I flipped through each page, one by one, looking for any hint of truth. But all I saw were staged smiles, matching outfits, Christmas cards, school portraits. Not one photo of me as a newborn. Not a single one. Only shots from when I was 5, around the time they said she married David. I felt the heat rise in my throat again, but this time I didn't cry. I took the album, walked it to the fireplace, and I stood there with it in my hands, just breathing. I didn't burn it. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was angry. I simply took a pen and under the first family photo, wrote, "None of this is real." And then I put the book back, closed the glass doors, and started planning. I didn't go to work that week, not because I was falling apart, though I probably was, but because every part of me felt locked in a kind of suspended concentration. Like if I let myself return to the world, I'd miss something important. A memory, a clue, a name. Instead, I stayed home, made lists, read every email from Lorraine 3 times, and pulled every legal document I could find out of my storage boxes: birth certificates, medical records, school registration forms, anything that might contain handwriting, a date, a signature. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The birth certificate I'd grown up with, issued in this state, under my mother's name, had a seal that looked off, slightly pixelated. I ran my fingers over it. No raised embossment. Nothing official feeling about it. The more I looked, the faker it felt. So I emailed a friend of mine from college, Maya, who had gone into family law. We hadn't spoken in years, but I told her I needed advice on verifying adoption records, real quietly. She didn't ask why, just told me what to request from the county. Then added, if something looks wrong, it probably is. I stared at that line for a long time. If something looks wrong, it probably is. That applied to my entire life. It had always looked a little wrong. Just tidy enough to avoid questions, but sterile, cold, scripted. Every family vacation was a photo op. Every birthday party felt like an obligation. I was always the one tagged in the Christmas card, with a note in parentheses, Claire's doing something with writing. We think I'd never been asked what I wanted. Not really. I'd just been slotted in, the way you might decorate a room with an expensive vase. Impressive from the outside, but untouched. Until now. It wasn't revenge I wanted. Not exactly. I wasn't going to kick down doors or scream in anyone's face. That would have been easy, predictable, cathartic. Maybe, but short-lived. What I wanted was exposure. Quiet, devastating exposure. I wanted the mask to slip. So I started collecting emails, signatures, school forms that listed David Harmon as my biological father, signed in my mother's handwriting. But he couldn't be. Because Lorraine had told me something else on that phone call, something that echoed in my head for days. Jonathan, David, whatever name he uses, he has a scar on his left wrist. Burn mark. From a fire when he was young. I knew that scar. He always wore long sleeves at dinner. But once, when I was a teenager, he helped me carry a box up to the attic. And I saw it. I asked him about it, and he said he got it in college. Horseplay with fireworks. Then he smiled like it was no big deal. But it was. Now I knew it was. That scar was the bridge. I printed out Lorraine's emails, highlighted the description, and clipped it to a copy of my stepfather's LinkedIn profile. A profile with a resume that began in 1997, 2 years after I was born. Before that, nothing. No records, no degree, no previous job, just a sudden appearance. It wasn't a gap. It was a reset. He had buried Jonathan, rebranded himself as David, and slipped into my life like a ghost wearing a father's smile. I had enough. Not for court. Not yet. But for the truth. I didn't plan to say anything to my mother. Not right away. I knew her. Confrontation only made her colder. She'd twist, deflect, deny. No, I wanted her to see it unfold. So I uploaded the documents to a cloud folder, sent it to Sam with no message, no explanation, just the name of the folder, Ask Mom. Then I waited. He called that night. What the hell is this? Claire, you tell me. Are you saying Dad isn't your father? No, I'm saying he's not anyone's father. He lied about who he is. And so did she. He went quiet. You always said I was dramatic. I added that I made things up, that I didn't belong. You were right about one thing: I don't belong. Not to this family. Not the way you thought. You could have just talked to her. I did. She lied. I asked for the truth, and she gave me silence. So I found it myself. There was a pause. Claire, this could ruin everything. Then let it. I hung up. It wasn't anger. It was peace. For the first time in my life, I felt it. Let the storm come. Let everything fall. Because now, finally, I knew where I stood. And it wasn't in their house anymore. It was in the truth. The first cracks didn't come from my mother. They came from Sam. 3 days after I sent him the folder, I got a text, 1 line, 3 words. She knew everything. No punctuation, no context. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide whether to be shocked or relieved. But the truth is, I wasn't either. I was numb. Because of course she knew. She always knew. It wasn't that she married a man with a new name. It wasn't that she adopted a baby from a scared 19-year-old girl and forged the paperwork. It was that she stayed. She knew the man who stood beside her had stolen a child, me, and she smiled next to him in family portraits for decades. She called it motherhood. I called it silence. Sam's next message came an hour later. He'd confronted her, and she had crumbled, not into confession, but into rehearsed panic. She said he did it for love. He wrote. I laughed, out loud. The sound shocked even me, because it wasn't funny. It was absurd. It was monstrous. For love. That's what you tell a child when you don't want to explain the monster under the bed. That's what you say when you've turned your whole life into a performance. My mother had let that lie harden around her like armour, and now it was cracking. Good. I didn't reply to Sam. I let him sit with the weight of it. Let him squirm in the awkward truth that the family he'd always defended was a set of coordinated performances. Let him finally feel what I had felt since I was old enough to recognise that I was tolerated, not loved. That weekend, I drove to the cemetery. Not for them, for me. Lorraine had told me her mother, my biological grandmother, was buried here, in the same city, by pure coincidence. She never got to meet you, she said. But I'd like to think she would have loved you. I brought yellow tulips. I didn't know if they meant anything, really, but they felt right. Soft, honest. Her headstone was small and simple. Margaret Mendelssohn, 1948-2004. The grass around it was patchy. Someone had left a porcelain angel, chipped at the wing. I knelt, and for the first time in years, I spoke without rehearsing it in my head first. I think I used to pretend I had a grandmother. I whispered, a real one who would have remembered my birthday, who would have called me special without making me earn it. My throat tightened. I didn't know your name until last week, but I think I missed you my whole life. I left the flowers, not out of grief, out of recognition. A silent nod between 2 people who never met but somehow belonged to each other. I drove home in the quiet. No music. Just the hum of the tyres on the road and the weight of everything I now knew pressing gently on my chest. When I got back, there was a message waiting in my inbox. From Lorraine. She detached a file, a scanned journal page, dated January 4th, 1996. She was born yesterday. I didn't even get to hold her. They said I couldn't, that it would make it harder to let go. But I didn't want to let go. I never wanted to. I felt her leave me, and I've never felt whole since. I read that line over and over. I felt her leave me. She meant physically, but I knew the feeling. I'd been leaving rooms my whole life, always stepping aside, always wondering why I didn't fit. That journal entry didn't give me answers. It gave me a wound to hold with both hands. But this time, it was mine. That night, Sam called again. He didn't ask how I was, didn't even say hello. She's gone. I sat down. Gone. Packed a bag. Left Dad. I don't know where she is. I didn't say anything. She said she needed time, that she never wanted it to turn out this way. I could hear the unravelling in his voice. For once, he wasn't angry. He was lost. I think she's scared. He added, "Good." I said, without emotion, "You broke this family." "No," I said. "I just turned on the lights." There was a long pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. I think I always knew something was off. Even when we were kids, I just didn't want it to be real. I waited. He sighed. "Do you hate her?" I closed my eyes. "No." I whispered. "I don't hate her." And I didn't. I pitied her, because she gave up her soul to keep a lie alive. And I'd finally learned to breathe without it. I didn't hear from my mother for 2 weeks. Not a call, not a text, not even one of her passive-aggressive voicemails filled with long sighs and half-spoken guilt. She vanished as easily as she had inserted herself into the lie. I imagined her somewhere cold and clinical, probably a hotel suite with a faux fireplace and overpriced wine, convincing herself she was the victim in a story that never belonged to her. That's what people like her do. They don't apologise. They disappear until the dust settles, then return with a new version of events. But I wasn't waiting for her. I was building something else. I called Lorraine again. This time, it wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. "I want to meet," I said. There was a beat of hesitation. "Are you sure?" "No," I said, "but I want to do it anyway." She drove down 3 days later. 8 hours. Alone. She didn't ask to stay with me, didn't assume. She just booked a small Airbnb and told me the address, like she was afraid of intruding. She had every right to assume I might bolt, but I didn't. I met her at a park near my apartment. Middle of the afternoon. No expectations. I chose the place carefully, somewhere neutral, somewhere safe. I didn't know what I was walking into. Neither did she. When I saw her sitting on the bench, I almost turned around. Not because I didn't want to see her, because I did. Too much. She stood when I approached, her coat clutched at the middle. She looked exactly like her photo familiar in a way that made my heart ache. Not because we looked so much alike, but because she carried the same quiet energy I'd always carried, cautious, observant, soft-spoken. She didn't reach for me, didn't push. She just said, "Hi, Claire." I nodded. "Hi." We sat. There was silence at first. The kind you only get between two people who have waited years to breathe the same air without a wall between them. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "We can just sit." So we did. For nearly 20 minutes, we watched dogs chase frisbees and children scream at ducks. It could have been any afternoon. For everyone else, it was, but for me, it was everything. Finally, I spoke. "Did you ever think about coming to find me?" Her answer was immediate. Every day, I looked at her. They told me it was a closed adoption. She continued. No contact. No names. Just gone. And after a while, I was made to feel like I didn't have the right to look. "Who made you feel that way?" She gave me a sad smile. "Everyone." I understood that look. The weight of internalized guilt. The kind women carry like second skin. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything. If you'd gotten to keep me, what would my name have been?" She inhaled softly. "Eliza. Eliza. It was my grandmother's name. She raised me. She was kind." I let the name hang there for a moment. Eliza. I tried it on in my head. I didn't feel any closer to it than I did to Claire. But it was a name given in love, and that mattered. "Do you want to see baby pictures?" she asked. Hesitant. I nodded. She opened her bag and pulled out an old photo album, worn and floral, like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. She flipped carefully, landing on a page that showed her 19, tired and glowing. That's me. The day before. Her face was fuller then. Hopeful. Young. "She took this," she said, pointing to an older woman beside her. "My mum. She died not long after you were born." "I visited her grave," I said softly. Lorraine's eyes went glassy. She would have loved that. We went through the album slowly, page by page, and with every turn, I felt something inside me begin to soften. Not repair. That wasn't the right word. But maybe reform. Later that night, she walked me to my car. "I don't want to push anything," she said, "but I'd like to stay in touch, even if it's just emails or postcards." I looked at her, this woman who had lost me, who had been erased from my life by people who called themselves parents, and I said, "I'd like that too." We hugged. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was gentle and real. When I got home, I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead, I made tea, lit a candle, and sat with the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The next morning, I checked my mailbox. A thick envelope waited for me. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. My mother. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, written in her careful script. It began, "Claire, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand why I did what I did." I stopped reading there. Not because I couldn't, because I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because her explanation didn't matter more than the truth I already had. She'd had her chance. Now, it was my turn to choose who I became. Not as her daughter, not as someone stolen, but as someone finally becoming real. I didn't open the letter for 5 days. I left it on the counter, untouched, beside a bowl of oranges that were starting to soften. It sat there like an artifact, a relic of a version of me I was no longer willing to inhabit. Every morning I passed it. Every night I ignored it, because I knew exactly what would be inside. A narrative, a performance, a history rewritten in passive voice mistakes were made. I didn't know how else to protect you. I was young. He was persuasive. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They were always good with language. My mother and David. Their lies were never loud. They were neat, concise, surgical, delivered with the right amount of tears. Just enough logic, just enough sadness to make you feel like you were the unreasonable one. So, I left the envelope there, and lived. It was strange. How quickly life kept moving after everything shattered. Groceries still needed to be bought. The trash still had to go out. I still had to wash my clothes, feed myself, answer emails from clients. Only now, when I looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back didn't feel blurred. I saw myself clearly, not as someone's daughter, not as a leftover from someone else's mistake, but as someone separate, someone surviving, someone choosing. On the 6th day, I opened it, not because I was ready, because I was no longer afraid of what she'd say. The letter was exactly what I expected, and somehow worse. She said she hadn't known, at first, what David had done, that she believed he'd adopted me through alternative channels, and that she'd only learned the truth years later. But by then, you were already mine. That phrase was underlined. Already mine. Like I was a sweater she'd bought on impulse but decided to keep. She wrote about her fear of losing me, about how people wouldn't understand, how the story would ruin everything we built. I stared at that line for a long time. Everything we built. There was no we. There never was. She chose complicity. She chose control. And I was never a partner in that. At the end, she asked if I would consider meeting. Just the two of us. No David, no explanations, just two women talking. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beneath my sink, the one where I keep expired coupons, dull scissors, batteries that may or may not still work. It belonged there, with the things I no longer needed, but couldn't quite throw away. That evening, Lorraine called. She always asked before calling, always texted first. I like that about her. Her gentleness, her boundaries. We talked about small things, the weather, her job, a book she was reading. She didn't push me to open up. She just made space, like a bench left empty just in case someone wanted to sit. At the end of the call, she said, "I've been thinking, would you ever want to meet your birth father?" I froze. Of course I'd thought about him, but I'd kept him in the shadows, where it was safer, where he couldn't hurt me or disappoint me, where I could shape him into an idea, not a person. "Do you still talk to him?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not in years. He reached out once, maybe 10 years ago, sent a letter. I never replied." I swallowed hard. "Do you know where he is now?" She sighed. "Last I heard, he was in Chicago. Remarried. Has a daughter. He teaches philosophy at a university." The absurdity of that made me laugh. A philosopher. A man who stole a child and vanished into a new identity. Now lecturing on ethics and truth. "Do you want his contact information?" she asked gently. I was quiet. "I'm not ready." I said, "Not yet." "That's okay," she replied. "There's no rush. You set the pace." And I believed her. That night, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years, leather-bound, stiff from disuse. I opened to the first clean page and wrote, "Who am I when no one is looking?" It took me an hour to write anything more, because for so long, my identity had been sculpted by other people's lies, their silence, their convenience, their shame. But now, I had room to ask the question, and space to answer it. In the coming days, I started therapy again. I told my story without crying. I listened to my voice in the quiet of a therapist's office, and didn't flinch. I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. And slowly, I began to write, not just for work, for me. Little essays, observations, snippets of memory, some angry, some hollow, some oddly warm, each one a piece of the life I was stitching back together, not to cover the wound, but to honour it. I didn't expect the email from David. It came late on a Tuesday night. I saw the notification flash across my phone screen as I was brushing my teeth, and for a moment, I thought it was spam. But the name David Harmon still triggered something in my chest, even after everything. The subject line was blank. Of course it was, just his name, sitting like a shadow. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Claire, I won't defend what I did, but I want you to know that I have lived with it every day. You may not believe me, but I loved you. From the moment I saw you, it was real. I understand if you don't want to speak to me. I won't reach out again. I just needed to say I'm sorry. I hope you find peace. Dad. The last line hit me harder than it should have. Dad. Like he still had the right to sign that way. I sat down on the edge of my bed, holding the phone like it might burn through my palm. I read it again and again. Every line was calculated, careful. Just enough sorrow to seem human. Just enough detachment to protect himself. I won't defend what I did. That line was the defense. I have lived with it every day, but he lived with it, not me. I survived it. I loved you. He didn't love me. He possessed me. There's a difference. I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the nightstand. He would not be the last voice I heard that night. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, remembering moments that now felt unreal. The time he taught me how to ride a bike. The birthday card he gave me when I turned 10. The one with the glitter unicorn and a $5 bill tucked inside. The time he bandaged my knee after I fell off the swing set. Was that love? Or was it maintenance? Was it guilt, management? Or was it real? And then I remembered the scar. That thin, silver crescent on his wrist. I remembered the way he'd hide it without thinking. The way he once told me. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is not to let them define you. I used to think that was wisdom. Now, I think it was justification. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't delete it either. I archived it, let it exist in that digital purgatory, where things go to be neither forgiven nor forgotten. The next day, Lorraine called. She could hear it in my voice before I even said anything. You heard from him. Yes. Are you okay? I thought about that. Not really, but I'm not falling apart either. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's something. It was later that week, I made a decision. I called Sam. He answered on the second ring, his voice hesitant. Hey, I want to come over. I said, not for long, just to talk. There was a pause. Okay. When I arrived, his daughter answered the door. Mia, bright-eyed, cautious. She looked at me like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to be happy or scared. Hi, Mia, I said gently. She nodded and stepped aside. The living room was the same. Perfectly curated, neatly stacked books. A vase of lilies, not a single toy out of place. His wife wasn't home, thankfully. I wasn't ready for her cold, small talk. Sam stood by the window, arms crossed. Thanks for coming, he said. I nodded, sat down on the edge of the couch. We didn't speak right away. Finally, I said, I'm not here to rehash everything. I need to say some things out loud. For me, okay, I don't blame you for what they did. I said, but you didn't protect me either. You let them make me the outsider, the problem, the one who was always almost part of the family, but never quite. His jaw tightened. "I know," he said quietly, "and I let it happen too." I added, "I tried so hard to be good, to be useful, to not make waves, but I think you knew something wasn't right, and you stayed silent." He didn't argue. He just nodded. "I'm not asking for an apology." I said, "I'm asking for distance, for space. I need time, maybe years, maybe forever. I don't know yet." "I understand," he said. "I hope you do." Mia appeared again, standing in the doorway with a drawing in her hands. She looked between us, then shyly walked over to me. She handed me the paper, crayons, bright colours, a house, a stick-figure girl with curly hair like mine, and a sun that took up half the page. I smiled. "Thank you," I whispered. Sam watched silently as I folded the picture and slipped it into my bag. I stood. He didn't try to stop me, and this time, I didn't look back when I walked out the door. I put the drawing on my fridge, Mia's stick-figure version of me, with the lopsided smile and oversized yellow sun, stared back at me every time I reached for the milk. It didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't erase anything, but it reminded me that children always see things more clearly than we give them credit for. She saw me. Maybe for the first time in that house. Someone actually did. I stared at that drawing the next morning as I sipped coffee in the quiet. The silence was no longer oppressive. It had changed shape, no longer something I was trapped inside, but something I had chosen. A silence that allowed me to think, to feel, to exist on my own terms. And somewhere inside that quiet, something softened, not toward them, but toward myself. Because for years, I had internalized their distance as my defect, their coldness as my failure, their silence as my punishment. But it wasn't me. It never was. It was a story written without my consent, played on repeat, and I'd been cast as the shadow from the beginning. But I wasn't a shadow. I wasn't a ghost. I was still here. That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag and drove to the coast. No reason, no ceremony, just a craving for salt air and anonymity. The kind of setting where you don't have to explain who you are. Just show up, walk along the water. Let the waves remind you that time is relentless and healing is not linear. I checked into a cheap inn by the cliffs. The woman at the desk didn't ask questions. She handed me a key and pointed to room 4. No formality, no expectations. The room smelled like lavender and sea salt. It was barely big enough for the bed and a chipped dresser, but it was mine for the night. No memories, no history, just space. I dropped my bag and walked down to the water. The tide was coming in. Cold wind bit at my cheeks, and my shoes sank into the damp sand with every step. I let the wind push against me, let the waves roar their indifference. And for a while, I didn't think about anything. I just was. I thought about Lorraine, how gently she moved through the world, how much she had lost and still found space to love. I thought about the ache in her voice when she spoke of January 3rd, how she had dreamed of holding me just once, just to know I was real. And now, here I was, real, standing in the salt air, with her blood in my veins and her eyes in my reflection. Later that night, I called her. I'm at the ocean. I said, I'm glad, she whispered. I always found the sea healing. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Sometimes healing lives in silence too. When I came back home the next day, the air felt different, like something had shifted. I unpacked slowly, took my time with the ordinary things, washed the dishes, lit a candle, wrote in my journal, I am not their secret anymore. A few days later, Lorraine sent a package. Inside was a quilt, hand-stitched pale blues and soft browns. On the back, a note was sewn in delicate script for Eliza. You were always real. Mum. I held the fabric to my chest and sat on the floor, tears slipping down without warning. It wasn't about changing my name. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been erased. I draped the quilt over the back of my reading chair, not to forget Claire, but to welcome both. There was room for her too. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a reply from the university in Chicago, a short response to the inquiry I had sent weeks ago, one I hadn't told anyone about. A request for verification. Yes, they said. Jonathan Mendelsohn was currently teaching a course titled Moral Reasoning in Modern Ethics. The irony was almost too perfect. I stared at his faculty photo, greying hair, clean suit, pleasant smile. A man who taught 20-year-olds about right and wrong while burying the kind of truth that reshaped lives. I didn't feel hate. Not anymore. But I did feel ready. I opened a new message, typed out the greeting slowly. Professor Mendelsohn, I believe we've met. Once, a long time ago. You may not recognize me. I go by Claire now. But you knew me by a different name, or perhaps no name at all. I'm not writing for revenge. I don't need anything from you. I just want you to know that I know. And I'm still here. Claire, I didn't hit send. Not yet. But I saved it. And that was enough. I didn't send the email. Not that day. Not the next. Not even the week after. I let it live in my drafts like a match left unlit. Small, potent, patient. A kind of quiet power I didn't need to wield to feel it burn. Because, for once, the silence didn't mean weakness. It meant control. My control. Not the kind they used to keep me quiet. The kind I gave myself. To pause. To choose. To exist without reaction. Instead, I turned toward the life I was beginning to rebuild. I said yes to dinner with a friend I'd been avoiding for months. I went. I ate. I laughed at the right places, and when she asked, "So, how's your family?" I didn't flinch. I just said, "It's complicated." And that was enough. Because the full truth wasn't required in every room. It wasn't a wound I owed to strangers or acquaintances. It wasn't a scar I had to press into conversation just to prove I'd survived. It was mine, and I didn't need to bleed to be believed. Later that week, Lorraine sent a photo. No context, no caption, just an image of her holding a small baby in a hospital gown. A Polaroid. Her eyes swollen from crying, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked both exhausted and luminous. There was no baby in the picture, just the way her arms were wrapped around empty air. I stared at it for a long time, then finally texted her, "Was this taken after they told you I was gone?" She replied immediately, "Yes. It was the only moment they gave me. I asked the nurse to take it anyway. So I could remember that I'd held space for you. Even if they didn't let me hold you." I didn't cry. I'd cried too many times already, over too many missing pieces. But something in my chest shifted again. Not like a collapse, more like a door opening. I printed that photo, framed it, placed it beside the one I still had from childhood, me in a white dress, smiling stiffly between my mother and David. 2 stories, side by side, both real, both broken, both mine. That weekend, I visited Lorraine again, this time at her place, a quiet house just outside Portland, full of warm light and creaky floors. She'd baked lemon bread, It smelled like my favourite bakery from childhood, even though I'd never been there with her. Funny how memory clings to sensation, not facts. We sat at her kitchen table for hours, talking, not talking, just being. At one point she said, I kept a room ready, for years. A room. She smiled sheepishly. A nursery, at first. Then, just a room. With books. With things I thought you might like if you ever came back. I know it's silly. It's not. I said, it's beautiful. She showed it to me later. Pale yellow walls, a handmade bookshelf, a rocking chair that creaked when I sat in it. On the windowsill sat a snow globe cracked, but still full of sparkle. I picked it up and shook it gently. We didn't say much after that. Some silences don't need filling. That night, as I was preparing to head home, Lorraine stood at the door holding something wrapped in tissue. I want you to have this, she said. It was a pendant, simple silver, inside, a tiny pressed forget-me-not. It belonged to my mother, she said. She wore it every day. I used to play with it when I sat on her lap. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and took it. And when I got in my car, I cried for the first time in weeks, not because I was broken, but because something in me had been gently placed back where it always belonged. The next morning, I opened the draft email again, read every word, deleted the last line, and I'm still here. It wasn't necessary anymore, because he already knew. If he had opened that email when I wrote it, he would have felt it, not the words. The fact that I had written them at all, that I had found him, that I had seen him, and chosen not to be his. I closed the browser, opened a blank document, and began to write the real story. Not for them, not for closure, for me. Because I wasn't a secret anymore. I was a woman. I was a daughter. I was becoming. I didn't tell anyone I was writing it. Not Lorraine. Not Sam. Not even my therapist. I just opened my laptop each morning and let the words bleed out, soft and steady. Some days I only wrote a paragraph. Others, I couldn't stop. It was like opening a long locked drawer and finally letting the light pour in. I didn't write to accuse. I didn't write to punish. I wrote because the silence was no longer sustainable. The story was heavy inside me, and it needed a place to go. At first, I told myself it was just for me. A personal archive. A quiet attempt to make sense of the chaos. But as I read back the early chapters, my earliest memories, the inconsistencies, the cruel birthdays, the subtle exclusions, I realised it was bigger than me. This wasn't just my story. It was the story of every woman who had ever been gaslit into silence. Every daughter who had been moulded to fit someone else's comfort. Every secret that had been dressed in politeness and passed off as protection. So I kept writing. I didn't use real names. I changed locations. I blurred dates, but I kept the truth sharp, honest, unapologetic. One morning, I submitted an excerpt to a literary magazine. It was a quiet publication, mostly essays and anonymous memoirs. I didn't expect anything, just wanted to place the story somewhere outside myself for once. Let it breathe. They replied in 3 days. They wanted to publish it. Just one piece. A segment about the moment I first realised I didn't belong to the people who raised me. The Christmas dinner. The envelope. The silence. I agreed. The day it went live, I felt nauseous. Even though it was anonymous, even though no names were tied to it, I felt exposed, like someone had peeled back the skin of my past and left it pulsing in the open air. But then the messages started, not from my family, from strangers, women, So many women. Messages that said things like, I thought I was the only one who felt like a guest in my own childhood. This broke me. And then it built me back. Thank you for saying what I never could. I cried reading them, because for the first time, the truth didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a bridge. A month later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was shaky, older. Inside were 3 words on a note card. I'm sorry. J. No explanation. No plea. No full sentence. Just that. I read it once. Then again. Then I slid it into a folder labelled Closure, not because I felt finished, but because I finally had enough to stop looking for an apology that would never come the way I needed. I never told Lorraine. I didn't need to. Some things are better kept as pages in a drawer. Later that summer, she and I took a short trip to the mountains. Just 2 nights, a cabin, no internet, no distractions. We hiked, cooked, sat in rocking chairs and watched the stars emerge like a slow confession. The last night, she asked me, do you think you'll ever want to find your new half-sister? I looked up at the sky, 1,000 quiet answers above me. I don't know, I said honestly, because I didn't need another family to define me. I didn't need more answers. I wasn't searching anymore. I was living. When we got back to the cabin, Lorraine handed me a photo, one I hadn't seen before. It was me. A scan of a hospital record photo, the only one that had survived, she said. In it, I was red-faced, tiny, swaddled, eyes closed, sleeping, peaceful. This is how I remember you, she said, even when I couldn't see you. I didn't speak. I just held the photo and let the truth settle over me like a second skin. This was real. This happened, and I was still here. Not lost, not broken, not erased. By autumn, the leaves began to shift, first at the edges, then in bold, unapologetic sweeps of red and amber. My apartment, always too quiet in summer, suddenly felt full again. Books stacked on the floor, candles half burned, the scent of cinnamon and something close to peace. I didn't realise how much space silence took up until I stopped trying to fill it with apology. My therapist once asked me, "What does forgiveness look like to you?" I hadn't answered at the time. I'd shrugged, said something like, "I'm not there yet." But one afternoon in early October, as I was walking home from the grocery store with a paper bag pressed to my chest, I saw a woman helping her mother out of a taxi. The older woman moved slowly, leaning into her daughter's shoulder with practiced weight. I paused, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel longing. I just felt okay. I didn't want my mother back, because I had never really had her to begin with. What I wanted was honesty. What I wanted was warmth that didn't come with strings. And I had that now, in little pieces, in Lorraine's voice on the phone, in the way I held my own hand when I was anxious, in the words I'd learned to write without flinching. Back home, I found another envelope in the mailbox. No name on it. Just my address. Inside was a check. $15,000, memo line, reparations. No note, no signature. I didn't need one. Only one person in this story had that kind of guilt, and that kind of money. I folded the check once, then again, slipped it into the drawer with my birth certificate and that apology from Jay, a drawer full of truths I no longer needed to explain. I never cashed it. Some things aren't debts to collect. They're just weights to leave behind. Later that week, Lorraine sent me an article. I didn't recognise the headline at first, Local professor resigns after anonymous. Memoir raises questions about past. There was no mention of names, no accusations, just speculation, a timeline that didn't add up, a few quiet whispers from former colleagues, a sudden decision to retire for personal reasons. I forwarded it to my private email, then deleted the original. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the wind had passed through and moved everything just slightly out of place. Enough to matter, but not enough to collapse. That weekend, I visited Lorraine again. This time, I brought her something. Not flowers, not food. Just a small, wrapped box with a simple note inside. For the woman who waited. For the mother who never stopped hoping. Claire. Inside was a pendant, almost identical to the one she'd given me, but this one held a tiny pressed daisy, my favourite flower. When she opened it, she cried. Not from sadness, from recognition. We had made something real, something no lie could touch. That night, we made tea and watched the rain beat against the windows. I asked her what she wanted to do for the holidays. She laughed and said, anything that doesn't involve ham or secrets. We planned a small trip. Just us. A quiet cabin. Board games. Books. Firewood. No carols. No forced traditions. Just presence. I fell asleep that night in the guest room under the quilt she made for me. The one stitched with care and second chances. And in the dark, before sleep took me, I whispered to no one I'm not lost anymore. And I wasn't. I was not what they made me. I was what I chose to become. A woman who had been rewritten, erased, recovered. A daughter claimed in silence and returned to the light. A name spoken into the world, not with fear, but with fullness. The cabin Lorraine and I rented for the holidays sat on the edge of a frozen lake, tucked into a cluster of pines so tall they swallowed the sky. No cell reception, no Wi-Fi, just the two of us. A wood stove that groaned when it got too warm, and the slow, rhythmic hush of snow on the roof. We didn't decorate. We didn't pretend it was Christmas. We let the days pass like quiet breath, measuring time in cups of tea and chapters read aloud. It was the first holiday I'd ever experienced without performance. No matching outfits. No brittle smiles at a too long dinner table. No hollow toasts or carefully placed passive aggression disguised as jokes. Just peace. I hadn't realised how much of my life I had spent bracing for something, waiting for the next disappointment, the next cold remark, the next moment of being made to feel other. But here, by the lake, I exhaled for the first time in years. On the third night, Lorraine made soup. I baked bread. We played cards. And as the fire cracked low into embers, she asked me quietly, "Do you think you'll ever go back?" I didn't need to ask what she meant. Home. Family. Them? No. I said, "Not really." She nodded. Didn't ask why, but I answered anyway. Because it was never mine. It was a script. A box I was folded into. "Do you miss them?" she asked gently. I thought about it. I miss who I wanted them to be. And that was the truth. The longing wasn't for what I had lost, it was for what had never existed to begin with. That's the kind of grief no one warns you about. Not a death, but a denial. The ache of what could have been, but ache becomes part of you eventually. Like an old injury that flares when the weather shifts. You learn to live around it. You stop trying to numb it. You start building something sturdier. That night, I wrote a letter. To no one. To everyone. To myself. Maybe. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to say the words, "I forgive you." Not because you asked, not because you deserve it, but because I am no longer willing to carry the weight of what you did. I forgive you and I set you down, but I do not invite you back in. I folded the letter, sealed it, and tossed it into the fire. Not for ceremony, for finality. Lorraine watched without asking. She understood. The next morning, we took a walk along the frozen edge of the lake. The world was muffled. Still, every step a crunch in the snow, every breath a soft plume of warmth against the cold. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. When we got back to the cabin, there was a note tucked into my coat pocket. I recognised Lorraine's handwriting immediately. You were never lost. You were just waiting for someone to find you and tell you the truth. Now you found yourself. That's the most honest love there is. I didn't cry. I just sat with the words. Let them settle. Let them root. That night, I slept with the window slightly cracked. The cold crept in, kissed the edges of the quilt, brushed my cheek. I didn't mind. I had spent years trying to stay warm in a home that never welcomed me. Now, even the cold felt honest, and I had everything I needed. When we left the cabin the next day, Lorraine hugged me longer than usual. She didn't say goodbye. She said, "See you soon." And I believed her, because this, whatever we were building, was not temporary. It was real, it was chosen, and it was mine. I didn't plan anything dramatic for the anniversary, not a celebration, not a vigil, just a quiet morning. 1 year to the day after I placed that envelope on the Christmas table and walked away. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, watched the city wake slowly, like it had nothing to prove. The world didn't pause to acknowledge what had changed for me, and that was okay, because I didn't need witnesses anymore. Some revolutions happen in silence. Some reclamations don't look like victory. They look like peace. That day, I gave myself a gift. I walked to the courthouse. Not for revenge, for records. I'd waited long enough. My birth certificate had been updated 6 weeks earlier, after the state finally confirmed what I'd already known in my bones. My name, my mother, my origin. No more falsified lines. No more missing fields. No more pretending. I stood in line like anyone else, presented my documents, paid the fee, and when they handed me the envelope official, sealed, real, I didn't cry. I just nodded and walked out into the sunlight with the truth pressed to my chest like a second heartbeat. I didn't need to tell them I had done it. Not my mother. Not David. Not Sam. Their permission was never required, and their forgiveness, I'd stopped needing that, too. Somewhere along the way, the ache had become a scar. Still there, still part of me, but no longer open, no longer bleeding. A mark of where I'd been, not a definition of who I was. That afternoon, Lorraine came over. She brought lemon cake and a photograph she'd just found a snapshot from her high school graduation. In it, she looked exactly like I had at 20, wary, hopeful, wearing someone else's borrowed confidence. I didn't know what I wanted back then, she said, handing me the photo. Just that I wanted to be seen. You are, I said, and she smiled. We sat on the floor of my living room, legs crossed like children, flipping through old books, drinking tea that went cold too quickly. Time moved differently when it wasn't measured in survival, and for the first time, I let myself ask something I'd been afraid to say out loud. Do you ever think we'll feel whole? Lorraine tilted her head. Thought about it. I don't think wholeness is a fixed shape. She said, I think it's the collection of everything we keep and everything we let go. I breathed that in, then let it out. Maybe she was right. Maybe wholeness wasn't perfection. Maybe it was presence. Maybe it was the ability to sit in your own story, even the worst chapters, and still choose to keep reading. That night, I wrote the final page of my memoir draft. I didn't end it with a triumph. I ended it with a door, a room, a voice saying, "Come in. You're allowed to be here." I closed the document, turned off the lamp, and stood at the window once more. Snow had started to fall, soft, steady, not like that night a year ago, when I walked into a house filled with beautiful lies. This snow was quieter, gentler, honest. I wrapped myself in the quilt Lorraine had stitched for me, pulled the pendant gently between my fingers, and whispered. Not to them, not to him, not even to the version of me I'd left behind, but to the girl I finally saw clearly in the reflection of the glass. You made it, and I had, not because they let me, not because they said sorry, but because I chose to, over and over again, through silence, through rage, through every locked door and buried name. I chose to, and that is the kind of story no one can rewrite, not even the ones who tried.